This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is Decision 2012 on City Talk. Presidential debates 2012, one down and two, and a vice presidential debate in the next 2 weeks. Do presidential debates change elections? Specifically, did the first presidential debate on October 3rd change the dynamic of the 2012 race? That is, did it fundamentally alter the race's trajectory? And more generally, how do debates refashion elections and campaigns? To address these and other questions on the history, nature, and impacts of presidential debates is David Birdsell, Dean of the School of Public Affairs at Baruch College. David is one of the premier authorities on electoral debates. He's the co-author of the definitive study of presidential debates with Kathleen Jamieson, Presidential Debate: The Challenge of Creating an Informed Electorate. He has written and lectured extensively on political debate and is a frequent media commentator on debate and political rhetoric and communication. Welcome back, David.
Great to be here.
Let's set the tone here. Do presidential debates change elections?
You know, it's sometimes a little hard to find the effects of presidential debates, but on balance, most research will suggest at this stage that it does. Now, when I say most research, there's a sharp difference of opinion in the field. Political scientists largely coming down on the side of no effects. Communication scholars largely coming down on the side of, yes, there are some effects. Here's the difficulty. First is defining a debate.
Right.
It's not just what happens within the 90 minutes of the actual debate itself. It's also the post-debate commentary. It's also the pre-debate expectations game. It's the harvesting of debates for spot advertisement and then what plays on the nightly news for 24, 48 hours. In the case of the October 3rd debate, 72 hours beyond
96 weeks.
It just keeps on going. So if you look at that package of the way that debates become a focal point for a week, 2 weeks of campaign media that essentially frees the other aspects of the campaign out of consideration, debates certainly matter. They matter in terms of what people hear. They matter in terms of what it takes off the table in terms of campaign alternatives.
Now, do voters learn from debates? Is there substantive learning? Do preferences change? I mean, what's the dynamic?
There are several things that we believe that we know and show up fairly consistently in the data. Voters do learn from debates. There are two kinds of voters who learn the most, and they're at the polar ends of the spectrum of political information. Voters with a lot of information available, they pay close attention to politics, they look at debates and they try to find out nuanced information about how a candidate handles questions, how the person is likely to perform on the campaign trail, does the information contradict or reaffirm earlier campaign narratives. So they're looking to a certain extent to be able to provide opinions that will in turn shape opinions. The other people who learn a lot are people who know very little. They're perhaps getting their first introductions to the candidates and they're saying, hey, that person is for tax cuts or whatever the case might be, and beginning to attach people to policies. Doesn't always work perfectly. We found actually in the 2000 debates that people consistently misunderstood Al Gore's issue positions and attributed them to George W. Bush. So this is an imperfect process, but people do in fact learn. They do consolidate ideas about candidates and either confirm or disconfirm what they've seen in advertising, particularly in swing states, which is now where advertising goes.
Those 9 states, you haven't seen too many political ads here, and I haven't seen too many in New Jersey, and we're not likely to.
If I hadn't been traveling, I wouldn't have seen a one.
That's right. Let's go to October 3rd. You and I watched the debate together in an audience of Baruch students. We turned off the commentary as soon as the debate was over. And then you turn on the internet, and there it was. It was this resounding rejection of Obama. Romney won the debate, and for the next week, all we've had is this drumbeat of Obama blew it, There's today's Daily Beast. Did Obama just throw the entire election away? A lot of hyperbole here. Comment.
Well, it's hard to figure out exactly where all of this comes from. Was it a great night for President Obama? It was not.
No.
Was it an absolute out-and-out disaster before the commentary that made it an out-and-out disaster? Was it really all that within the 90 minutes of the debate itself? I think probably not. There are at least a couple of things going on here. One is the expectations game. You have, in addition to partisan expectations about negative storylines coming out of the opposing camp, you have inflated expectations for your own candidate. And I think there was a strong expectation from the liberal end of the commentator spectrum that he was going to do an exceptional job with a candidate who had seemed in every dimension in Mitt Romney to be very weak going into the night. That didn't happen. It frustrated the expectations. And you heard the loudest yelping from liberal commentators.
Yep, Ed Schultz, I mean, all the liberal, a lot of the liberal commentators, and it seemed that they were just viscerally reacting to this, and that storyline has carried through for the entire week.
Absolutely, and objectively, Obama was pretty flat. Some of this might have been an aspect of strategy, not necessarily his advisor's strategy, but his own strategy. He didn't necessarily want to make sparks. He didn't want to make news. He's coming in.
Well, he certainly didn't make positive news.
He didn't make positive news. But this was a very contained performance. He wasn't going after Mitt Romney on pretty much any dimension. There could be a variety of strategic reasons for that. And there are two ways to lose a debate, right? You can either fail to execute on your strategy, make huge gaffes, forget how to say what it is that you want to say, or you can execute the strategy pretty well, but it's the wrong strategy. And I think we had a case on October 3rd of the second condition.
Right, the wrong strategy. And this wasn't rope-a-dope.
No.
This wasn't rope-a-dope. Some Dems have been arguing that it's rope-a-dope, that he's setting Romney up for the next debate. That ain't happening.
It may be possible to use it as rope-a-dope, but it certainly wasn't intended to be that in this case, to let Romney get so much traction out of this debate. And you look at the Romney performance, I think one of the things that has interested me about some of the reaction to this debate is that some of the observations are simply counterfactual. We had a long essay on Friday from Paul Krugman, for example, talking about Romney, what he alleged to be Mitt Romney's misrepresentation of his intention to cover pre-existing conditions in his health care plan. Without recapitulating that argument, it basically boils down to that's already the law of the land under COBRA. And he said, too bad Mr. Obama couldn't find a way to say this. Well, he did. He said exactly that. He said almost precisely the litany of arguments that were in that article. And time and again, in some of the reaction to this, you have assertions about how the candidates responded. I'm just going to share one more.
Go ahead.
A New York Times reporter commenting immediately following the debate on the webcast said, well, you know, this is a case in which Romney, who's always been good at staying on message, just stays maniacally on message. What message? He contradicted every storyline and every policy position that came out of the convention. Now, maybe this is an advantage of the Romney approach. Take a million positions and then you're never off message because you've got to be inconsistent with something you've said in the past. But it's a curious notion of what we usually think of as being on message.
But does Romney have to pay for that? One would think that your expanded notion of the debate would be the Obama administration that very night, almost before the debate ended, began cutting ads. So the debate, in a sense, it ended at 10:30 on Wednesday evening, but the impacts of that debate, certainly for Romney, have reverberated, but also they have potential positives for Obama.
I don't think
if they can make the case that he is a serial flip-flopper and he contradicted major positions of his campaign.
Your first version of the question, I think, is the important one. Does Romney have to pay for this? And the answer is no. I mean, let's just stipulate for a moment, and obviously there will be viewers who disagree. Let's stipulate that he's taken a broad range of positions on a broad range of issues. He can get away with that as long as it's unrebutted. And what President Obama's challenge is for the 16th, that's the next debate, what Joe Biden's challenge is on the 11th, that's the vice presidential debate, is to try to point to this in a synoptic way that is legible and parts of the electorate that don't follow this closely, who can't say that Romney took this position in December and this position in January and this position in March and this position at the convention and now it's different. They don't know that. How do you encapsulate that in a way that doesn't come out directly and say, you're lying about this, but say in a compelling and convincing way, you're not being consistent and we don't know who you are? That's a steep challenge, and it's one that clearly Obama did not rise to on October 3rd.
He has to do a Bill Clinton.
He has to
essentially.
do a Bill Clinton,
and he has to do a Ronald Reagan to Jimmy Carter. There you go again. You got to call him out. And that was what was striking about what was a lackluster performance on the 3rd.
He clearly failed to encapsulate campaign themes in ways that resonated against the new positions that Romney was articulating in that debate. And I think we should be very clear that there were many, many new positions. I think there's another point that's important to raise here. Debates are not good places generally, and Romney may be proving the rule with creating an exception on October 3rd. They're not good places to announce new policies because they don't give you the spaciousness that you need to say what a policy should look like and what it would be. They're places to recall policy positions that you've articulated elsewhere. And voters tend to forget this. There is in the study of opinion here, and this gets back to another definition, back to your question on do debates matter, that's important too, and that is, what does change mean? Does change mean a durable change that lasts all the way from the time that something happens in a debate to election day?
Right.
Or does change mean a little bit of movement that then has to be sustained with other messages in that debate, beyond that debate, in all forms of campaign media? There's a decay effect in what people learn from debates. There's a decay effect in how their opinion changes. So that if I tell somebody that this person is associated with this policy on Wednesday, they probably remember that on Thursday morning. It might be a little bit foggy by Thursday night, and they've forgotten it completely by Saturday. So you need to be able to reinforce it. That is arguably one of the roles of media in commenting on and foregrounding these debates.
In one sense, looking at the commentary, there's almost a crisis of commentary. In fact, insofar as they accepted Romney as he was and looked at sort of the personal characteristics. He was aggressive, he took charge, he was likable, he looked like a leader, and really essentially ignored the substance.
There has been very, very little parsing, particularly of Romney's statements in this debate. And some of them are truly extraordinary. And they're extraordinary for a couple of reasons. They're extraordinary, number one, because it represents a sharp, sharp turn away from the very conservative positions that he was espousing as recently as the week after the convention.
3 days before the debates.
Yeah.
On the stump.
Right.
Really, in terms of tax cuts, health care, etc., they're diametrically opposed to what he said. He became a moderate all of a sudden on October 3rd. Now, does he stay a moderate, or now does he go back to being a creature of the Tea Party ideology?
Well, this is one of the questions.
Or a proponent of it.
Clearly, one of the things that has not happened following this debate, it's absolutely par for the course, and we know this, that liberal Democrats trend toward the center from the left in general elections after running to the left to win a primary. Conservative Republicans trend to the center from the right.
Right.
And everybody expected Romney to do this much earlier than he has done it.
Right.
We have not seen Republican blowback from his positions taken in this debate. He might have seen that if he had done this earlier, if he tried to do it at the convention.
Right.
But people on the red side of American electoral preference are so happy to have something to cheer for right now. And there's no question, whether we attribute it to Romney's performance by itself or Romney's performance plus the subsequent commentary, that this has significantly re-energized the campaign and significantly re-energized Republican voters across the country.
You can see it in the candidate. If you look at him on the stump over the last week, he is pumped. Even Ryan is pumped. The campaign is pumped. The supporters are pumped. There's really, it seems to me, an enthusiasm bounce and an enthusiasm gap. The polls seem to suggest that there's been a depressing effect on rank and file Democrats, let alone activists and supporters.
Well, everybody in the Romney camp has to be looking across at the Democrats right now and saying, this is how it feels, folks. The Romney campaign couldn't do anything right as far as the press was concerned for quite some while. And it showed in his poll results. It showed in a relatively subdued and depressed performance. The Democrats can't allow that to be the storyline as long as Romney allowed it to be the storyline for the GOP, if they hope to win the White House on
Okay,
November 6th.
let's move to the media and to pollsters, two of my favorite folks. The media needs a narrative. The narrative was, prior to the election, that Romney was bumbling, he was shooting himself in the foot, and that the polls were widening, and this, even though it wasn't over, it's heading that way. The fat lady wasn't singing, but she was clearing her throat and reaching for the atomizer. And then all of a sudden, Romney does well and Obama does poorly. Now it's Romney, Romney, Romney. You got to almost expect that at some point they're going to look for the counter narrative, and that is, for example, maybe on the 16th, it's the comeback kid. The new story that Obama gets off, the sports metaphor, gets off the canvas and at least fights him to a draw and maybe lands some blows.
The prior existence of narratives that shape an understanding of character, that shape an understanding of the trajectory of the campaign, almost always find their way into shaping stories and shaping storylines. In addition to the comeback narrative that you've laid out, I think you're exactly right. There's also this narrative about Barack Obama that he doesn't really bring his A game unless his back is against the wall.
Okay.
And his back is now officially against the wall. And this is a very competitive person. It fits into all of the narratives as well as what we know about the personality, which is slightly different in this case. But I bet all of those converge. If he has even an okay performance on the 16th, that those come roaring back in the commentary.
Okay, let's do the polls. Two major polls released this past Monday, one by Gallup, one by Pew. The Pew poll has dominated the news headlines, which shows that Romney has now, after trailing substantially, now has a 4-point lead, a 9-point swing. And in that poll, it shows that there are more Republicans now than there were before the poll, and many more women are supporting Romney now than before the poll. Let's look at those polls. Particularly the Pew poll. What's wrong with that poll?
I'm not sure that there's anything wrong with the poll. The majority of the sample was taken in the day following the debate, so it was really, really close to the debate with probably the lion's share of the commentary. Not that it died down, but that was when it was occupying almost all of the commentary space on cable news. So it could have shown more of a bounce effect than some other polls may have shown. This is, there's an open question as to whether you should allow party identification to float with popular enthusiasm. That's one argument and not a bad way to do it, but it's very different from trying to assemble your poll in such a way that you either correct for the actual registered presence of that party in the electorate. And that's an open question.
As a survey researcher, we tend to go for the self-identification and let it fall where they may rather than waiting to pre-existing. But is party identification that fluid that you watch a debate and say, well, I sort of like Mitt Romney, therefore I'm a Republican?
Well, the question is how independents are understanding their own identity. I mean, do they have a Republican day when they see a Republican candidate they like and it makes them feel good to identify with that candidate for a period of time? I really don't know how to explain that movement, because pretty clearly if we look at the steps that people take to formally make themselves Republicans and Democrats, you don't see boards of election overwhelmed on the day following a debate, not this one either. So I'm somewhat skeptical that that is a durable finding. And I would be equally skeptical if you saw a big bounce in one day in Democratic identification.
And the other anomaly in this poll, not to say that Pew doesn't do excellent research. I mean, this is the best poll that Romney has had by an extraordinarily high quality research operation. But you look at women, he goes from 18 points up among women to a dead heat, a tie among women. What happened during that debate, and what was the commentary that would lead a significant proportion of women to switch from Barack Obama to Mitt Romney.
Well, it's hard to adduce the gender effects, but let me make one observation, and again, trying to think about the evidence in the debate.
Go ahead.
I thought that Obama's opening statement was ill-advised, poorly executed.
And Romney came back perfect.
And Romney came back perfectly, but this was a statement that went right to gender. He decided to wish Michelle Obama a happy anniversary by apologizing kind of, sort of, for being in this place. It wasn't a funny joke.
No.
It wasn't well delivered.
No.
He didn't look like he was terribly enthusiastic about the debate.
No.
He didn't look like he was terribly enthusiastic about the anniversary. Plus,
all of that.
All of that. Plus, he gave Mitt Romney an opportunity to humanize himself, which is exactly what he wanted to deny him the chance to do throughout that debate. He does it in the very first salvo. That could have turned this debate. Romney's very humanizing, very deft, one of the few actually funny lines that we've heard from Mitt Romney on the stump. It worked for him in that stage. That might explain some of the gender disparity.
Okay, let's move from the presidential debates now to the vice presidential before we go back to the presidential. This Thursday, we've got the vice presidential debate. What's the format? What's the history of vice presidential debates? And this one seems to have greater salience and meaning than most. Perhaps the 2008 had more interest because of the Palin phenomenon. Talk about the format. First of all, what's the format of that debate?
The format of the debate is going to be very similar to the format that we saw on Wednesday night. They're going to be facing a single moderator, and it's going to be ABC's Martha Raddatz. And she will be asking questions. The question is, does she behave much like Jim Lehrer did and largely get out of the way of the debate, or does she enforce relatively
and
more
also, does she ask
limits?
Pointed questions and follow-up, which Lehrer didn't do?
Exactly. And there's a real difference of opinion about this, by the way, and I feel for the moderators to some extent. Is it the moderator's job to call one of the contestants out in terms of factual accuracy, consistency with past positions, et cetera? I happen to believe that that would be a good thing, particularly consistency. But many people believe that that should be the opponent's job, and that it's the opponent's goal to try to frame a case. And obviously, fear about being charged as having a partisan slant really causes the moderators to back down on all of that. But two vice presidential debates. There are basically two and only two things that have happened in vice presidential debates, unless people embarrass themselves on their own dime. All right?
Like
like the good Admiral Stockdale. We'll get to him in a couple of minutes, or Dan Quayle for that for that matter. One is, can this person actually serve in the role of the president?
Right, the heartbeat away.
Right, should the president leave office for any reason. Number two is to attack the top of the other ticket.
Yep.
And since the first vice presidential debate, there wasn't a vice presidential debate in the Kennedy-Nixon series.
No.
That was all the top of the ticket.
Yep.
So the first one is in 1976 with Bob Dole and Walter Mondale, when Bob Dole famously went and attacked
with a hatchet
and talked about Democrat wars, and including a war in which he fought with great valor and distinction. So these folks tend to go at one another, or at least go at the top of the ticket in the person of one another. I don't expect it to be any different this time. I think you're right, though, about the raised stakes. And the raised stakes are that the Democrats have a much higher premium on changing the narrative.
Yep.
So if this becomes, again, the sort of rambling wreck, the rolling catastrophe, which is a term that Peggy Noonan once ascribed to the Romney campaign, and that Andrew Sullivan now ascribes to the Obama performance, if they can make sure that that October 3rd performance becomes isolated as that performance from which they now on Thursday begin to recover, they're probably okay. But if they can't do that, then that's a narrative that dogs them potentially all the way to November 6th.
Okay, let's quickly go to the next presidential debate, which is sort of the town hall meeting forum. How does that work, and what do they have to do? What's your advice?
Well, the town hall forums are interesting because you have much more flexibility with regard to the way that you engage the camera,
Right.
and much more flexibility with regard to the way that you ask the address the questioners. And the questioners, of course, are not professionals,
Right.
so you can't beat up on them and hope for sympathy from the public. They're members of the public, so you've got to assume that the viewing public is sympathizing to some extent with the people who are their tribunes in that room for that particular evening. The master of this was Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
And in the very first town hall debate in 1992, when he rode up to the apron of the stage and engaged members of the audience, particularly a young woman who asked a question originally of George H.W. Bush.
Who couldn't answer it.
Who couldn't answer the question. Has anybody in your family, have any of your friends been affected by the debt? And Carol Robinson, who was anchoring, said, reframed that in that case and said, I think she really means, when Bush was stumbling with this, the condition of the economy.
And he still couldn't do it.
He still couldn't do it, and then walked away from her while continuing his answer. Bill Clinton pops off his stool, runs to the edge of the stage, gets in a two-shot with her, and starts asking her questions. You're talking about how the economy affects you, aren't you? You want to know if I know? Well, I sure do know. And it's a classic. Before he used the words, I feel your pain, he was clearly feeling her pain.
Okay. And then we have a third presidential debate, the final presidential debate on, October 22nd, I believe.
Correct.
Which is back to the single moderator.
Yes.
And which one of these debates move away? Is that the foreign policy debate, or is it the second
That's the
debate?
foreign policy.
Okay.
The second debate,
It's domestic again.
Well, it's
open.
It's whatever the questions are
is
actually
asked.
written by the people in
Right.
the room and chosen by the moderators. So it's whatever they ask.
What expectations do you have strategically of both campaigns moving forward in terms of debates generally?
For this cycle.
This cycle.
Clearly Obama has to make up lost ground. He has to find a succinct, synoptic, and readily available way to tag Mitt Romney with his multiple positions and to make him explain, or to make clear why it's such a very serious problem that he does not explain, a tax policy that in that debate, I would argue, moved from merely opaque to opaque and utterly incoherent.
Right.
With goals that simply cannot logically be served at the same time. That's hard to do.
Right.
Because you've got to remind people of things that they may not have known in the first place, and if they knew them, they've probably forgotten them. So that's a tall task for the president in that case. Romney has to maintain the momentum. He has to continue to conjure this newly energetic and available and winning Mitt Romney, and I think that he really was all of those things.
Right.
If you ignore for the moment that he was also a man with an entirely new platform that was in sharp contradiction to most of the positions that he'd taken earlier in the season.
Wow. So I'm going to be with you for 3 more debates.
At Baruch College.
At Baruch College.
It's going to be a wonderful time.
You're welcome to come. My thanks to friend and colleague David Birdsell for being on the show. Next week we'll talk about health care, Romney versus Obama, here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.